Hey guys, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is adhesives. When we're doing collage, I primarily have been working with glue, but that's not to say that you can't work with other materials, including Mod Podge, tape, or spray adhesive. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the things that you see on the table here, and hopefully it'll give you some insight into the types of adhesives that you can work with. The wood glue is what I used originally on my skateboard, and you can really tell because it dried yellow. So it dried yellow, and you can see that in the pages. It kind of gave it this old aging effect, something that could be similarly achieved with like tea or coffee, but it was totally unintentional, and I didn't really think about it when I got it. I just knew that wood glue would be like a really good adhesive for things that are like paper and wood, because they're kind of the same thing, right? So then somebody told me that I can get the white glue, and so it was $25 for a gallon. It's like $12 almost for the little tiny container of the yellow wood glue, and it was $25, so just about double for that bigger gallon container at the back. And I just think that the gallon is like really worth it because you can do a lot of things with it, and it dries clear, so that's like a huge advantage. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it's UV resistant, so it might yellow over time, but I haven't had that experience with it yet. So like, they're both Podge. They're going to be right beside each other in the hardware store, so that's something that you can kind of just pick up at like Canadian Tire or Home Hardware, whatever your local hardware store is. Yeah, and it turns out I'm a pretty big fan of Podge. Like, they seem to be, like, I've had really good experiences in working with their products, and even the No More Nails, that's something that's more like a construction adhesive. It's more like a paste, and I worked with that to repair a Guy Fawkes mask, so we're going to talk about that really shortly as well. The Mod Podge is something a lot of people will use it to do a variety of crafts. If you read the container, it says water-based sealer, glue, and finish. So it seems like you can do pretty much anything with it. And I know that people will seal puzzles with it, and they will like use it to do image transfers, which is something that we are going to explore very shortly. But Mod Podge is something that, you know, you'll see come up often, and you can get it at like any local craft store. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the 3M Super 77 Classic Adhesive Spray. So this is an aerosol, and for myself in my practice, I tend to just stay away from aerosols. If you'll notice on the container, there's the flammable, the poison, and the explosion symbols. So those ones are it's just a little bit intimidating to work with. And so what I find is that I prefer to work with liquid or paste and water-based materials. The spray adhesive I used to create the glitter rifle, and so that was something that I made in school, and it was just more of a thought experiment, and that really transformed over the course of the last few years, and so we're going to talk about that in another video as well. If you don't have any glues for collage, that's totally not even a problem, because you can use things like Scotch tape, masking tape, packing tape. I've included painter's tape here. Painter's tape and masking tape kind of are doing the same thing in the sense that they're meant to block paint or block glue or block whatever it is that you want to put on top of it. And so a lot of the time you'll see people use painters or masking tape with like watercolor, because they'll tape their paper down and then they'll paint, and then once they're finished their painting, they'll peel off the tape and get these really beautiful clean edges. I personally really enjoy painter's tape for hanging artworks for, you know, with paper. But you can use other things instead of that. It's just something that I use it for frequently. I also use painter's tape to mark tabs in books because it doesn't damage the paper so much. So if you, instead of like dog-earing your books or marking them, you can totally just take a little piece of painter's tape, fold it over to make a tab, and then I put it right on the line that I want to remember, so that when I go back, I can just flip open to that tab with the painter's tape, and I'm exactly where I want to be. So the other thing that I use is packing tape, and I use packing tape a lot in sketchbooks. So say you do pencil drawing and you're like, I really like this pencil drawing, you can kind of laminate it with the packing tape. And so that is a really useful kind of like instant lamination tool. It's kind of tricky because you got to make sure that when you're smoothing it down, that that all of the surface touches and that you're not getting any creases or bubbles or ripples. You can get rid of bubbles with just like using little thumbtacks or something to kind of poke a hole, or you can kind of squish them to the edge, and a lot of the time that works. But yeah, you can use the packing tape to laminate envelopes. Like, that's one of my favorite things that we're going to talk about momentarily. Like, I use the envelopes to create beautiful letters attached to gifts, or something that I think is really amazing is like writing a letter to your future self. And so that's something that I would encourage you guys to do, just for yourself, because if you write something kind to yourself, you might find it in 5 or 10 years, and it's like a really wonderful thing. Like, just tape in general is a really useful tool. It's used a lot in film industry and theater industry. because it's fast, it's an adhesive, it's clean by comparison to it, like liquid adhesives like glue. So it's just really efficient. If you don't have glue to work with for collage, that's totally okay. You can use, Scotch tape. Scotch tape isn't very strong, but it's going to do the trick for the time being until maybe you decide you want to glue it down later, or you want to cut out your stuff, glue it to cardboard, and then like create like a shadow box. There's a lot of potential with adhesives to do things. The Mod Podge, we're gonna do the little tiny sketchbook, and we're gonna experiment with a couple of different types of paper, and that'll be the cover of the book. Overall, I think that working with water-based materials, I have a preference for working with water-based materials just because they generally feel safer. And then the aerosols, when you're working with aerosol, you have to really gear up and protect yourself, because you want to have a really good gas mask or like a dust mask so that you're not getting the particles into your lungs, because when they bind with with the mucous membrane, it's just really not good for us. It's toxic. So for our day-to-day, I think it's more than fine to work with water-based material, and I just do it because, it tends to be a lot safer. I don't have to gear up so much. I think that the best advice that I have is that you should just explore a bunch of different ones. If you are interested in collage and like the potential of all the things that you can do with adhesives, these things are really interesting materials to explore.